to episode 25 of Her Finance Talk. My name is Sue Diamond and I'm your host. And our goal is to help women create a better relationship with their money so you can live your best life. So thanks for joining us today and investing in your financial well-being. Her Finance Talk is brought to you by the Her Finance Club, and our mission is to socialize the idea that it's okay for women to talk about money, because knowledge is power, and when that knowledge helps you become more independent, it translates, to empowerment. So Women Empowering Women is a mantra that we love to live by, and one that has helped to inspire women for decades. Where would we be without each other? So today, we're going to be talking about what is a will and why do I need one? And we'll touch upon some other documents that are also important when it comes to decision making. So the reason we're going to be talking about this today, the recent estimates that I saw were anywhere from 50 to 60% of Americans don't have a will. Now, that's a lot of people with their heads stuck in the sand, hoping that things will just work out when they die. And the reason we're also talking about it here is that that's a really costly assumption to make. So dying without a will is going to cost not just your loved one's time, it's going to cost money and extra stress during the already stressful grieving process. So a will isn't about your death. It's about taking care of the ones you love. And the important thing to remember here is, lack of good planning can cost you money. And what I mean by that is, more attorney's fees later, more taxes, more money being paid to maybe a nursing home. And by planning ahead, you are able to protect what you've worked so hard for. We talk all the time here, about making your money, work for you as hard as you work for it. So let me start by welcoming today's guest, Susan Kommor. And Susan's mission is to make an impact by transforming your life through legal and financial wellness. And she coaches on how to access legal advice and other valuable resources that will help you, run, your household through all stages of life, as well as if you're an entrepreneur or have your own business, grow your business as well. She considers herself to be your family legal liaison. So Susan has a background in the financial services industry with previous roles, including, commercial bank sales officer. She's also a certified financial planner. And as an independent financial advisor, she focused on helping those who suddenly became single to get back on their feet and then create a plan to build their future. So she knows firsthand about this because she was there too. So I want to open up our conversation today, Susan, and I would love for you to, that was a very brief overview about, your expertise and what you do right now. So if you could expand on your story from, where you were and why you do what you do today and why it's important for you to help women build a plan for their future.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, and I appreciate that introduction. And I want to first congratulate you on your new book and your new program. You're doing amazing things with women, and I share your mission about starting conversations. And that's where it all begins, especially when you were talking about wills. And what happened with my career is that it evolved around conversations. And I started, as you said, as a bank sales officer in a bank. And that what I found that when I was determining my clients' needs, that I realized that people wanted more options and to talk more about money. So when I became a certified financial planner, I was able to give them more options and service them. And during my years as a financial planner, I was amazed that so many people I work with did not have a will in place. And these were professional business women and they owned businesses, they had families, and they did not have wills in place. So I made sure that we completed that as part of a sound financial plan. And then, as you said, later, as a single mom, I learned firsthand how important this document was in terms of my children. Where would they go, right? Who would take care of their well-being? So these are concerns, like you said. You could put, as you said, your head in the sand and say, well, someone will take care of them. Wouldn't you want to know that this is what will happen? And that's what a will does for you. And then when I remarried later, years later, I learned that there's another level of preparing a will, and that's with a blended family. So there are different, I guess the two takeaways that you can get from this is that your estate planning documents, the needs will evolve as you do, as life happens, and that you need to update that as your life changes, and that you need a lawyer to make sure that it's legal, that these documents are legal in the state you reside. So we're going to circle back to information and tools for your listeners later. So everybody keep listening.
Right. Yeah, I think, as we talk here, and I know you're going to touch a little more on some of the other things that are important, because we know that although there's no single document that will likely resolve every issue that arises after your death, a will, officially known as the last will and testament, that can come pretty close, right, in terms of what you need to know. And I know that, as you mentioned, in terms of children, the document, it spells out your wishes regarding the care of your children, not just your assets. And I think we talked about this when we initially talked about doing the podcast together. And similarly, when I was working in New York on a financial and estate planning team, I was so surprised to hear how many people didn't have a will. And I would often, especially families with young children, and I would always share with them, because especially here in New York, and I think it's pretty much the same for most states, I would tell them, well, if you don't have a plan in place, the state has a plan for you. And it may not be what you would want. So I think that's, as we talk about, what is a will and why is it important to have one, you really, really want to have something in place to ensure that your wishes are fulfilled in terms of, your children. And, again, failure to prepare that is going to, leave decisions about your estate in the hands of judges or state officials, right? Which could also cause some family strife as well. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So in terms of, as we think about let's talk about some of the reasons that people, don't have a will, right? And maybe that can help people understand, because some of the things that I hear, and especially the one that I hear a lot, is, oh, I don't need one, I don't have an estate. And we can get into that a little bit more. But again, just letting people know, or maybe sharing what are some of the reasons, and then we can talk about why it's important to ensure or emphasize that they have the will in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that what you said, and go back to what you said, that people are really, the number one reason is people are unaware of the consequences of not having a will. They don't realize, they think, oh, well, of course it's going to go to my spouse, or of course it's going to go to my children. And every state has different laws. So every state will have, as you said, instructions, if you don't, on what to do with your assets, who's going to take care of your children, and other factors. So most people are just not aware that these things happen. And then, as you also said, the just thinking that they don't have an estate, thinking that it's just for the wealthy.
Right. Yeah, because I hear one of the ones, oh, I'm too young. And first of all, you're never too young to have an estate plan, right? I mean, I think about whenever I hear young people say this, I don't have enough assets for a plan, or I'm going to wait until I have a family. What I'm really thinking they're saying is, I don't have a plan on going anywhere anytime soon because, I don't think I'm going to die and that I'm going to live forever. And we do, when we're much younger, we tend not to think about all the things that can happen in life. But, I guess young people are not alone in feeling that way as well when it comes to estate planning, right? Because it's really easy for us to procrastinate when it comes to creating an estate plan. And, so few of us are actually on our deathbeds. And I know, when you're 20, it's like, oh, I'm probably going to live till I'm 80. Why do I need to worry about this now? And it's not until we're faced, with that mortality head on that it can be difficult to grasp the importance of organizing your affairs. But I think, the sad truth is that, people die at all ages, right? And we know life is unpredictable. COVID just showed us that you never know, when your time will come. So you do need to prepare as though you will die tomorrow, right?
Well, and there's another reason why people procrastinate, because they don't want to think about that. And that's going back to conversations, having a conversation. We don't want to have that conversation with ourselves and then thinking about having that conversation with our family. It's very uncomfortable. So people don't do it. And as you said, the whole pandemic situation really brought this to life as how important it is, because people didn't realize what might happen, what could happen. And it's so much better to get this done and over with so you don't have to think about it.
Absolutely. And I get it that, because I talk about mindset all the time and, kind of these subconscious beliefs that we have that drive our behavior. And of course, in terms of, not wanting to think about death, there are some complicated evidence-based psychological explanations for why, we do this. But I think it all comes down to, as I say, belief, and that talking about death will somehow hasten it, speak of the devil, or and he shall appear, and all that jazz. But, the important thing here is, as you say, whatever the case is, avoiding the issue it's not going to make it go away, right? And especially when it comes to estate planning, avoiding it can have, as we've already mentioned, some dire consequences, not only for the individual, but for their loved ones. So that's, sometimes, unfortunately, we just have to suck it up and grit our teeth and push through the uncomfortableness of all of it. I remember my mother. So my mother, much more so than my dad, has a lot of foresight when she thinks about these things. So my mother, oh my gosh, more than a decade ago, had written everything out to the point where she'd picked the hymns for her service, because she didn't want anybody, she wanted everybody to know what her wishes were, and she didn't want anybody, having to worry about what they should be doing and not knowing what she would want, because I have 3 siblings, so there's 4 of us that all think differently about things. So she had said, it was probably more than a decade ago, we were walking around the house, and she's like, I'm asking everybody to identify what they want now. And I, was like, oh, I don't feel comfortable doing this. This is really eerie. I don't want to think about my mum when she's not here. But, she mentioned it a couple of times. And the more I thought about it, then I thought, well, this is really wise, because, again, working in the financial industry and then seeing the repercussions of, estates after parents had passed away. And oh my goodness, some of the sibling, I guess, fallouts were just awful because things weren't clear in terms of what that person wanted, and each of the siblings had a different idea. So again, I think, you know, it's so important to, again, it's not about death, it's about fulfilling, you know, your loved one's wishes, but also from your perspective in terms of writing the will, that you make it easier when you're no longer there, because it's tough enough dealing with this, you know, and the stress of it without having to worry about other aspects of the estate. And I don't know if you've come across that in terms of, you know, if you have any examples that you might want to share, Susan.
Yeah, there's so many examples, and especially what you're saying is that people are going through grief. So when there's a loss, when there's a death in the family, everyone's in a state of grief. And now you're asked to make decisions. And it's very difficult. And that's where the emotions come up, and siblings, people can get very emotional about this. And sometimes it's not even about the person who passed, it's about all of them. So this way, exactly what you said, you're resolving that. You are helping your family. Think of it as a memoir, as a love letter to your family. This is, you know, I love you, and this is how I'll make things easier for you. You're exactly right. I love how you said that. And it's even so important when going back to what you said earlier, a lot of people who are single with no children think, well, I don't need to do this until I'm married and have kids. Well, it's even more complicated when you're single, because who's going to take care of you have things, you might have a business, you might have a pet. And what about your social media? You have a digital life. All these things are talked about during the will process. And it's things that you probably would not have thought about before, and you get those in place. So there are examples when you're single, when you have a family later in life, and you just don't know what will happen to you. You don't know if you're going to win the lottery and suddenly have a huge estate, or be in an accident where you win a lawsuit. You don't know what's going to happen with your estate. That's why it's so important to sit down and think things out, so you have everything in place, so you don't have to think about this in that emotional state that you were just talking about.
Right. And I think, you know, 2 points there. And then I just wanted to mention the other thing that I hear from people. So online presence. I have made sure that my daughter, and that the platforms are getting better at that, you know, especially Google and some others, where they'll have you fill out a plan in terms of who will have access to your account in the event that it needs to be closed out. And, you know, if there's no activity on your account for 6 months, should we close it? So the social media platforms are definitely getting back, but they're not all doing that. And what I found to be really eerie, and this was in 2012, and I had a friend who'd passed away, and, you know, she was in her late 40s, and she'd been very active on social media. And what was really eerie was nobody could get into her accounts, and she kept appearing as a friend, you know, continually, not that it was posts, but her name kept popping up, and it was, I you know, I had a hard time with that. But I think, you know, just, you know, we have to be able to honor what your wishes are. The other one is taxes, because how many times was it? Prince was the most, who more recently? So Uncle Sam, you know, if you're not looking at your estate and how to manage it in terms of where you want the assets to go, then you could end up giving more than half of your estate to Uncle Sam. So that's really key if you want to ensure your children or your spouse are getting what you're, you know, what you want them to have as part of your estate. You want to make sure Uncle Sam isn't, you know, the key beneficiary in terms of that. And then the other thing that I've heard is, I only have one child, so, there won't be a fight over my estate. So I think, there's a couple of problems with this line of thinking, right? Firstly, avoiding a fight over your estate is not the only reason not to have an estate plan. But I think, a good estate plan, also addresses how your beneficiaries, and this ties right into the tax bit, will receive their assets. If you pass away and your children are still relatively young, do you want them to get it all at once? Or do you want to put it into annual portions? Or do you want to make sure there's some type of fund there? Because only after triggering a condition, I've seen all too often. Oh gosh, this was years ago. I was talking with a wealth advisor, and he had a client, and the parents were killed in a car crash, and the 3 children inherited something like, I don't know, $40 million between the 3 of them. Now, one of them was still in high school, so the money went direct. I think that, I can't remember if there was a beneficiary in place, but there was nothing after 18. So the son, who was the youngest, he ended up, I think that there was serious drug issues and a number of other things, but wasn't able to move forward in life because, he didn't have to work for a living, and there was no values associated with that. So in terms of what you want for your children, that's really important, and I don't have what I would consider wealth, but if something were to happen to my husband and I don't want my daughter having to deal with that all in one go. So it would be spaced out, and so she learned the value of getting the money. And I think it was Warren Buffett: give your children enough that they can do something with it, but not too much that they do nothing. So I think, that's a key component when we think about that. You've got to think about your kids. The other thing is, I don't know if you hear, it's estate planning is expensive. Is that something that, yeah.
We hear that, and that keeps people away. And I have solutions for that as well. I could help people with that to keep the costs down. There are plans that we have to keep those costs down. It's a matter of really, like you said, of being control of your hard-earned money. You spent time creating this, and you had discipline and control in creating whatever estate that you have. It's whether it's small or large. Now, the larger you have, the more there's tax implications, which is what you touched on earlier. So that's really important to see the size of your estate, and to realize that at any size, that when there's children involved, yes, you want control over how they're going to receive the money and the estate, and who's going to take care of it, and who can benefit from this the most. That maybe they need somebody to be a guardian of the money, which brings us to, the executor and other things that happen when you're preparing your will, because you will appoint someone, the executor, who will take your wishes and take your instructions and execute them. That's hence execute,
Right.
the executor. And then also people who, so I mean, that's important that you have that conversation.
Right. I think what might be helpful, if we tie it to a value, right? So when we say, oh, it's expensive, so we know life insurance is expensive, buying a house is expensive, buying a car can be expensive. But I think if we identify all the things that we're sharing today and the importance, and if you value those, then tying it to, this is a service that you're going to pay for, to put in place to make your family's life better. So I think if we think of it in terms of that, because we can, I guess, talk till the cows come home about how important it is. But it's like when I talk about financial goals, it's like, motivating one to do it and stay with it is tying to, why are you doing this? Why is it important to you? And what's the end result going to be? So I want everybody to think about that, the value behind this. It's about making your family's life better.
That's so well said, Sue. And I really believe that the value, which is the difficulty in seeing the value, is because it seems so far away, so far in the future. When you realize that you don't know what's going to happen day to day, that you don't know how far in the future it is. And that secondly, by doing and preparing your will, you'll also prepare these other documents we touched on, which would be your powers of attorney. And those are documents while you are living. Those are decision-making documents, so that if you are not able to make decisions, you have assigned people to make those decisions for you. So the sooner you do this will preparation, the sooner you'll also have those documents in place, which is right now while you're living. Very important.
Right. I think I had shared this story with you as well. So a couple of years ago, I heard, my parents are in the mid-80s now. So I had asked my dad, I said to him, if something were to happen to you, if you had a heart attack and you were on life support, what would you want us to do? And he turned around and he said, well, I don't know. I'm like, well, Dad, if you don't know, then how can, again, going back to 4 children, how can we determine what is best for you? We could all have our own perception of what we think you would want, or what we think is in your best interest. And that could create 4 people with different ideas. And then if my mum's there as well, a 5th, so I said, it's really important for you to think about this, because, we want to be able to ensure what your wishes are, and if you think about it, then you'll be able to determine what you would want to happen, but also to give us direction as well, so we don't all end up arguing about what we think should be happening. So I think that's important, so important, right?
Very important. And exactly what you said, that everyone will come from their own feelings. Really, we're going to be thinking about what would we want, because that's all we can come from. And it's very emotional. So when we know what they want, and it's just what he says, like, we don't know what you want. We know what we want. Maybe we don't even know what we want. And everybody's now thinking of themselves. So it does become emotional, and it makes somebody think and have this conversation. Even having a conversation of who will take care of your children. That's a conversation. Who you want as executor. You want the conversation, because when it happens, you want that person ready, that they've already agreed they're going to do this, because if they don't, it might end up back at the state.
Right. And I like to call it, it's an estate planning fire drill. So, it's like, I know if we think about it, we think it's a lot of work, but it's not nearly as painful as it sounds. So it can be as simple as, you're holding your estate planning fire drill and talking to family members about how to manage the estate, or how they want it managed. It's, I think it's really important that, we avoid any disputes, and there's an understanding of how, assets are to be transferred. So we want, I, for one, I know, want to make the planning process as painless as possible. And I think, in 95% of cases, I can get everything I need to prepare when I was working with the financial and estate planning team. So I think, again, often, I think, do you do consultations on this, Susan?
Yeah, so what I do is I help, and we'll be sharing a tool that will be available for your listeners is starting the conversation. So I will help them form questions for the attorney, because most of the questions will be answered by the attorney. I help them think about that. What do you want to ask? These are things you need to think about that an attorney can guide you.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So just in terms of, we're at our hour, our 30 minutes are up, and, we
So
could
quick.
talk about, I know we could talk about this all day, right? In terms of all the reasons why to do this. So I want to thank you for, sharing your story and sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure. So where can our guests find you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I so appreciate this conversation with you and spending time with you and your listeners. And I will, yes, I'll share with them that they could reach me through messaging on LinkedIn or Instagram. And also my website is Susan Kommor. That's SusanKommor.com, SusanKommor.com.
Okay. And I'll make sure, and as Susan mentioned, I think you also have a will questionnaire, so we can put a link to that. We'll put all Susan's contact information in the show notes. So if you have a question for Susan, or you want to reach out and get more information about putting your will together, you'll have that at hand. So I want to just emphasize, whatever your case is, avoiding an issue does not make it go away, as I said earlier. And when it comes to estate planning, avoiding it can have dire consequences for you and your loved ones. So remember, the biggest threat to your assets and your family is procrastination. Okay, so I want to take the time to remind everybody that Her Finance Talk is brought to you by the Her Finance Club, and our goal is to inspire 1 million women to start the money conversation with spouse, friends, or colleagues, because knowledge is power, and when that knowledge helps you become more independent, it translates to empowerment. So again, I thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and I'll also pop in just in terms of talking or getting around if you have an issue that you don't feel comfortable about talking about this with your family members. I talk about these subconscious beliefs all the time, so you can schedule a complimentary call with me, and there'll be a link in the notes. So again, here's to your financial well-being. Until the next time, bye-bye.
Thank you, Sue. Bye, everybody.